0 hours. February 19th, 1943. The Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, Type 2. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stands on a sun-scorched limestone ridge. He raises his ice binoculars and looks west. Below him, the United States Army is disappearing. It is not a fighting withdrawal. It is a rout. The Afrika Korps has just cut through the American lines like a blade through paper. In the valley floor, the debris of a superpower lies cooling in the sun. Abandoned M3 Lee tanks sit with their hatches open. Half-tracks are stalled in the sand, engines still idling. Artillery pieces, the pride of American industry, sit silent. Their crews fled before firing a single, effective round. For 50 miles, the retreat is absolute chaos. The statistics of the week are staggering. In just 6 days, the Americans have suffered 6,500 casualties. 3,000 of them are now prisoners of war. They are marching toward German cages. They look stunned. They look young. To the veterans of the 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions, they look like children playing at a man's game. That night, Rommel sits in his command trailer. He writes a letter to his wife. His tone is not one of respect. It is one of clinical satisfaction. He notes that the Americans are soft. He writes that they have no concept of tactical depth. They have the best equipment in the world, but they lack the soldierly soul required for modern war. In the eyes of the German High Command, the Americans are amateurs. The failure is not just at the foxhole level. It is systemic. Major General Lloyd Fredendall is the face of this incompetence. He is the American commander of the Second Corps. While his men die in the desert heat, Fredendall is 70 miles behind the lines. He has ordered engineers to blast an elaborate bunker into a mountainside. He spends his time obsessing over the construction of his underground headquarters. He does not visit the front. He does not talk to his colonels. His orders are sent via radio in a confusing private code. No one understands it. He has dispersed his divisions into isolated pockets. He has left them as sitting ducks for Rommel's concentrated armor. On the ground, the American infantry is learning a brutal lesson. Training in the woods of Georgia did not prepare them for the 88mm flak gun. It did not prepare them for the screech of the MG-42. When the German panzers appeared through the morning mist, the American lines didn't just bend. They shattered. German intelligence officers are unimpressed. They interrogate the new captives. They find the Americans to be undisciplined. They see an army of immigrants with no shared military tradition. They compare them to the British. The British are at least professional and methodical. The Americans, by contrast, seem like tourists in uniform. This is the baseline of the war. This is the moment the German soldier decides the American is a secondary threat. It is a moment of supreme confidence for the Wehrmacht. They believe they have seen the best America has to offer. They believe that material wealth cannot replace martial spirit. They are convinced that the Yankee will fold under the first sign of real pressure. But as Rommel watches the last American trucks vanish into the dust of the western dorsal, he misses a critical detail. The Americans are not retreating in despair. They are retreating in a fury. The defeat at Kasserine has not broken them. It has localized their objective. The amateurs are about to undergo the most rapid military transformation in human history. They are about to pay a stiff price for their experience. But the dividends will be rich. 21:00 hours. January 19, 4040 Tartar. The Wolf's Lair, East Prussia. Adolf Hitler leans over a map. He is surrounded by his inner circle. The topic is the industrial potential of the United States. Hitler dismisses the threat with a wave of his hand. He tells his generals that he does not see a future for the Americans. To him, the United States is not a nation. It is a mongrel state. It is a collection of immigrants. It is a society divided by race, class, and political bickering. The Nazi high command is blinded by its own pseudoscience. They believe national strength flows from racial purity. They see the German soldier as an Aryan ideal. They believe the Wehrmacht possesses an inherent martial superiority. This spirit, they think, will manifest on every battlefield. America is the opposite of this ideal. It is a melting pot. Hitler believes a nation of so many ethnicities cannot hold together. He thinks it will collapse under the pressure of industrial war. The German officer corps shares this prejudice. Their memories of the First World War confirm it. In 1917, the Americans arrived late. They fought in the Meuse-Argonne. German veterans remembered the doughboys as enthusiastic, but naive. They were brave, yes, but they were tactically clumsy. They attacked in frontal waves. They suffered heavy losses for small gains. They were undisciplined. They were unable to sustain complex operations. To the professional Prussian officer, the American was a part-time soldier. He was a civilian in a uniform. He lacked the soldierly soul developed through centuries of European warfare. This ideological blindness is a critical German error. It filters their intelligence reports. Analysts look at American factories and see washing machines. They do not see tanks. They look at the U.S. Army in 1939 and see it ranked 19th in the world. It is smaller than the Army of Portugal. It is smaller than the Army of Romania. The German High Command concludes that America is a paper tiger. They believe the Americans are too soft for the brutality of the Eastern Front. They believe they are too pampered by luxury to endure the mud and the blood. Nazi propaganda reinforces this myth. It portrays the American soldier as a gangster or a cowboy. He is someone who fights for money, not for land or blood. The German leadership expects the American front to crumble quickly. They expect a repeat of Kasserine on a larger scale. They are convinced that racial science is on their side. They do not realize American diversity is a source of resilience. They are about to meet a machine they cannot comprehend. Their arrogance will prove fatal. The world is about to change. 10:00 hours. March 6, 1943. Jebel El Hamra, Tunisia. A massive dust cloud signals a change in the wind. A command car slides to a halt in front of the 2nd Corps headquarters. Out steps a man who looks more like a movie star than a general. George S. Patton has arrived. He carries 2 ivory-handled revolvers. He wears a polished helmet and a high-collared jacket. He is here to perform radical surgery on the American spirit. Dwight Eisenhower has finally had enough of public failure. He relieved General Lloyd Fredendall after the Kasserine disaster. Fredendall was a man of the bunker. Patton is a man of the front line. He looks at the survivors of the retreat. He sees men who are slouching. He sees officers with no pride in their appearance. He sees an army that has mentally accepted defeat. Patton decides to break them before he can build them. The transformation is immediate and it is brutal. It starts with the small thing. Patton issues a series of orders that seem insane to men in a desert combat zone. Every soldier must wear a steel helmet at all times. They must wear neckties and leggings. They must shave every single day, even under the threat of artillery fire. To the grunts, these rules feel like petty harassment. But Patton knows exactly what he is doing. He is replacing the chaos of the retreat with the iron rigidity of discipline. He is forcing them to be soldiers. Patton moves through the encampments like a hungry predator. He finds an officer without a helmet and finds him on the spot. He finds a unit with dirty rifles and screams until the air turns blue. He is profane, theatrical, and absolutely uncompromising. He delivers his famous speeches about the necessity of violence. He tells his men that they are not there to die for their country. They are there to make the other poor bastard die for his. He is shifting the American psyche. He wants them to be far more afraid of him than they are of the German Wehrmacht. This is the psychological hardening of the 2nd Corps. Patton understands a truth that Rommel completely missed. The men who fled at Kasserine were not natural cowards. They were simply unformed and poorly led. They lacked the institutional spine required to withstand a professional blow. Patton provides that missing spine. He trains them until they can move and fire in their sleep. He drills them on the seamless integration of tanks and infantry. He forces his officers to lead from the very front or face an immediate court-martial. The atmosphere in the Tunisian desert changes in a single week. The slouching stops. The salutes become sharp and meaningful. The American soldier finally looks and acts like a professional. German intelligence officers, watching from the hills, notice the shift. The radio chatter is suddenly more disciplined. The patrols are more lethal. The so-called mongrel army of Hitler's nightmares is starting to bite back with precision. Patton has turned the 2nd Corps into a weapon. Now he just needs a place to swing it. That place is El Guitar. The Germans are about to meet a different kind of American. The amateurs are gone. The hunters have finally arrived at last. 6:00 hours. March 23, 1943. The Gumtree Road, near El Guitar, Tunisia Tata. A heavy gray mist clings to the floor of the canyon. 50 tanks of the 10th Panzer Division rumble forward through the haze. Their crews are relaxed. They are the veterans of the Polish campaign, the fall of France, and the Desert Wars. They remember the panicking Americans at Kasserine just 4 weeks ago. They expect to see backs turned in retreat before the first shells even land. They are driving into a slaughterhouse. The first indication that the world has changed is the sound of metal tearing. Lead panzers strike a hidden minefield, their tracks shredded, blocking the narrow mountain passes. Suddenly, the heights around them erupt. This is not the disorganized fire of February. This is a disciplined, interlocking web of destruction. American tank destroyers, hidden in the reverse slopes, open fire with a lethal accuracy that stuns the German commanders. But it is what happens next that marks the true birth of the lethal American fighting machine. The sky above El Guitar begins to scream. General Terry Allen has positioned the guns of the 1st Infantry Division with surgical precision. For the first time, the Germans experience the American Fire Direction Center in full effect. It is not a scattered bombardment. It is a concentrated wall of high explosives that follows the German movements with terrifying speed. When the German infantry tries to deploy from their half-tracks, they are instantly pinned by a deluge of shrapnel. When the panzers try to maneuver, the shells find them within seconds. It is a systematic, mechanical erasure of the German attack. The guns do not fire at where the Germans are, but where they are going to be. By 9:00 hours, the 10th Panzer is broken. 30 tanks are left as smoking ruins on the valley floor. The survivors are forced into a humiliating withdrawal. For the German soldiers who make it back, the shock is physical. They have been beaten by an enemy they were told was inferior. During interrogations, captured Germans are visibly shaken. Some weep openly. They tell their captors that this was the first time in the entire war they had ever been stopped by mere artillery and infantry without a massive counterattack of enemy armor. This was the day the German soldier learned that the American infantryman was not alone. They realized the Big Red One is no longer an army of amateurs interested in retreat. Terry Allen had promised Patton that his men would not pull back. He had threatened to shoot the first man who moved to the rear. He didn't need to. His soldiers stood their ground because they finally trusted their equipment and their coordination. The paradox of the Tunisian campaign was that Kasserine gave the Germans a false sense of security at the exact moment they should have been most alarmed. They thought they had seen the American standard. They had only seen the American starting point. What the Germans encountered at El Guitar was a learning organization in the middle of a violent evolution. The speed of this improvement defied every model the German high command possessed. They were no longer fighting a collection of individuals. They were fighting an integrated system that multiplied the lethality of every rifleman and every gun crew. Rommel, watching the reports from his headquarters, began to realize the amateur hour was over. The Americans had paid for their experience in blood, and now they were collecting the interest. The fear was no longer a strategic theory. It was a recorded fact on the desert floor. May 1943. The port of Tunis, Tunisia. The North African campaign is over. 275,000 German and Italian soldiers are marching into captivity. This is a mass of humanity 3 times larger than the disaster at Stalingrad. For the survivors of the Afrika Korps, the math of the war has fundamentally shifted. They had entered the desert as the masters of mobile warfare. They leave as prisoners of an industrial juggernaut. The German high command struggles to quantify this collapse. They had focused on the individual. They believed the quality of a soldier was measured by his training, his motivation, and his raw tactical skill. By these metrics, the veteran German sergeant was often superior to the American draftee. But the Americans were building a different equation. They were not just training men. They were building an integrated machine for waging modern industrial war. This is the emergence of the learning organization. While German doctrine relied on the intuitive genius of the individual commander, the American system relied on the multiplier. The individual American soldier was the baseline. But his effectiveness was magnified by layers of support the Wehrmacht could not replicate. It was a philosophy of institutional adaptation. Every failure was analyzed. Every mistake was treated as data for an immediate upgrade. Rommel himself recognizes this in his private papers. He writes with unusual candor that the Americans paid a stiff price for their experience, but it brought rich dividends. By the end of Tunisia, American generals were advanced in the tactical handling of their forces. They moved away from clumsy frontal assaults toward a seamless collaboration of arms. To the Germans, the American style of war begins to feel impersonal and relentless. It is less like a duel and more like an assembly line of destruction. They were no longer fighting an army of individuals, but a continental system that never stops improving. By the end of Africa, the Americans moved from amateur to professional with a speed that defies German logic. The machine is now fully assembled. It is fueled, it is manned, and it is pointed directly at the heart of occupied Europe. It combined mass production with tactical flexibility in the field. German officers began to sense a coming storm, and it was a storm made of steel and logistics. The German soldier was about to face the most terrifying weapons of the 20th century soon. 11:00 hours. November 12, 1944. A frozen ridge near Aachen, Germany. A German grenadier hears a single, lonely whistle in the sky. It is not a barrage. It is a ranging shot. He does not know it yet, but he has exactly 3 minutes to live. In the American rear, inside a heated canvas tent, the Fire Direction Center is at work. This is the mechanical brain of the United States Army. It is a place of slide rules, maps, and mechanical calculators. There is no shouting here. There is only the quiet, rhythmic clicking of numbers being crunched. This is the FDC. It is the reason German soldiers will come to fear the American infantry more than any other force on earth. The German and British systems relied on a forward observer talking directly to a specific battery. It was personal. It was slow. The Americans changed the game. They centralized everything at the battalion level. Any American observer on the front could call for fire from any battery in range. He did not need to know the gunners. He did not need a prior relationship. He only needed a coordinate. The FDC translated that map data into a firing solution in seconds. Standardized charts and mechanical aids reduced the time from request to impact to less than 3 minutes. For the German soldier on the receiving end, this speed was incomprehensible. In the Wehrmacht, a similar request for fire required 10 to 12 minutes to process. By the time the German shells arrived, the target had often moved. With the Americans, the shells arrived while the target was still checking its map. The American system treated the entire battlefield as a single lethal grid. They could mass the fire of dozens of batteries onto a single point with one command. They called it total gun control. This wasn't just the quantity of shells. It was the coordination. The FDC mastered a technique called time on target. Batteries positioned at different distances from the objective fired at staggered intervals. The math was calculated so every shell from every gun hit the same patch of ground at the exact same second. There was no warning shot. There was no first explosion to send men diving into their foxholes. There was only a sudden, catastrophic erasure of the landscape. One moment, there was a German platoon. The next, there was only a series of smoking craters. Captured German officers were obsessed with this system. They asked their captors if the Americans had an automated computer at every gun. They could not believe it was done by men with paper and pencils. The American infantryman understood that the FDC was his ultimate shield. He did not need to be a better marksman than his German counterpart. He did not need more courage. He just had to be the man who made the call. Within minutes, the problem in his path would be solved by a storm of steel. This was the industrial logic of Henry Ford applied to the trajectory of a shell. It made the old concept of a fair fight obsolete. The American artillery was a predator that never slept and never missed its mark. It was the terrifying silence before the storm that the German soldiers never forgot. Absolute. 14:00 hours. July 12, 1944. A dirt road near Saint-Lô, France. A German infantry squad is moving through a drainage ditch. They are trying to reach a new defensive line. Suddenly, one of the soldiers stops. He points to the sky. A tiny, yellowish-green aircraft is circling slowly overhead. It looks like a toy. It is made of wood and fabric. It has no machine guns. It has no bombs. It is a Piper L4 Grasshopper. To the German soldier, it is the most terrifying sight in the European theater. German veterans called these planes the angels of death. They knew the rule of the front. If you can see the grasshopper can see you. And if the grasshopper can see you, you are already dead. The pilot and the observer in that fragile cockpit were the eyes of the American artillery machine. They did not need weapons of their own. They carried a radio. They carried a map. The observer in the back seat would simply look down. He would identify a German truck, a machine gun nest, or a concentration of troops. He would call the coordinates back to the Fire Direction Center. Within minutes, the math was finished. The sky would begin to scream. The grasshopper would circle patiently. It watched the shells land. The observer adjusted the fire with calm precision. Left 50. Drop 100. He would walk the bombardment directly onto the German positions until nothing was left but smoke and scrap. The psychological effect was absolute. The appearance of a single Piper cub could freeze an entire German battalion. They knew that any movement would be spotted. They knew that firing at the plane was a death sentence. To shoot at a grasshopper was to reveal your own position to the guns waiting over the horizon. German commanders issued strict orders. No one was to fire on the observation planes unless they were certain of a kill. Even then, the risk was usually too high. The Americans had nearly 3,000 of these fabric-covered scouts. They were everywhere. They operated from dirt strips and open pastures. They flew low and slow. They hugged the tree lines. They turned the concept of the invisible enemy on its head. For the German infantryman, the fear was constant. There was no such thing as a secure position as long as a grasshopper was in the air. The American infantry did not just bring rifles to the fight. They brought the eyes of a god. Those eyes were always looking for targets. They were always watching. They never blinked. And the artillery was always waiting for their signal. This was the cold reality of the front. No German was safe. Not ever. Not now. 16:00 hours. December 20th, 1944. A frozen slope overlooking the Sauer River, Luxembourg. A German infantry battalion is dug into the hard, frozen earth. These men are veterans. They have spent years learning that a deep foxhole is the only real protection against massed artillery. If you are below the surface, the blast goes over you. The shrapnel hits the dirt. This fundamental rule of survival is about to vanish forever. The Americans have just unleashed a weapon that represents a billion-dollar leap in military physics. It is the variable time fuse. To the soldiers in the field, it is simply the VT fuse. Inside the nose of a standard artillery shell, American scientists have managed to miniaturize a complex radar set. This device is smaller than a pack of cigarettes. It is designed to withstand the violent force of being fired from a cannon. As the shell hurtles toward the earth at terminal velocity, it sends out a continuous radio pulse. When it detects the ground exactly 30 feet below, it triggers the detonation. The result is a vertical nightmare. For the German soldiers huddling near the Sauer River, there is no warning whistle. The shells do not bury themselves in the soft mud before exploding. They detonate in the air. They shower jagged, white-hot steel fragments straight down into the trenches. The protection of the earth is completely negated. Men are shredded while cowering in the very holes meant to save their lives. The lethality of a single American battery is suddenly multiplied by 10. General George Patton writes to the War Department with his usual clinical detachment. He calls the new arrival the funny fuse. He reports that a single battalion concentration killed 72 Germans by actual count. He describes the weapon as devastating in its effect. He is correct. The psychological break among the German survivors is immediate and profound. Prisoners captured during the bitter winter of 1944 describe a new kind of terror. They tell their American interrogators that some soldiers actually chose to leave their cover. They charged directly into American machine gun fire rather than endure the airbursts. They preferred the quick chance of a rifle bullet to the slow certainty of being torn apart by a shell that could see them from the sky. This was the industrial might of the United States distilled into a single, tiny component. While Germany struggled to produce even the most basic ammunition, the Americans were mass-producing miniature radar sets. They were firing them by the tens of thousands. The funny fuse took away the German soldier's last sanctuary. It turned his own defensive positions into a lethal trap. The Americans decided to end the war with a storm of fire that no amount of digging could escape. For the German infantryman, the sky itself had finally become a predator. There was nowhere left to hide on the battlefield. The machine had reached its final, most lethal form. It was the ultimate triumph of industrial death. Period. 14:00 hours. March 1945. A captured German artillery park near the Rhine. General Hans Eberbach surveys his command. It is a museum of European failure. He has guns captured from France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Russia. None of them use the same shells. None of them share the same spare parts. This is the nightmare of variety. A German supply officer must manage hundreds of different calibers and maintenance manuals. A shell made in a factory in Essen will not fit a gun captured in Warsaw. If a firing pin breaks on a Soviet-made piece, the weapon becomes a useless heap of iron. There are no spares coming. Across the line, the American perspective is fundamentally different. They have applied the cold, efficient logic of Henry Ford to the chaos of the battlefield. This is the triumph of standardization. Every M4 Sherman tank uses the same bolts. Every 105mm howitzer uses the same fuse. A shell manufactured in a plant in Ohio will fit perfectly into a gun assembled in Michigan, being served by a crew trained in Oklahoma. This industrial synergy creates a bottomless reservoir of lethality that the Wehrmacht simply cannot comprehend. To the German observer, the American supply chain seems like a supernatural force. It is not just the quantity of goods, it is the reliability of the flow. When an American tank is destroyed, a replacement arrives within days from a depot that never seems to empty. When an infantry unit expends its ammunition, a truck appears within hours carrying exactly the right crates. The flow never stops, never slows, and never fails. The Americans do not just fight with what they have. They fight with the entire productive capacity of a continent. The numbers tell the final story. During the 9th Army's Rhine crossing, 2,070 American guns opened fire at a rate exceeding 1,000 rounds per minute. In a single hour of concentrated bombardment, they expended over 65,000 shells. A German commander would have to conserve his ammunition for an entire month to match the output of a single American hour. This was the final crushing weight of industrial logic. The American infantryman was feared because he was the tip of an unstoppable mechanical spear. He was backed by a system that treated the liberation of Europe like a production line. The German soldier was a warrior fighting a duel. The American soldier was an operator running a machine. The machine was designed to never break. The machine was built to win. This logistical mastery turned every American infantryman into a force of nature. He was no longer just a man with a rifle. He was the vital human component of a massive global manufacturing operation. 90 hours. June 15, 1944. A sunken lane near Saint-Lô, Normandy. The American infantryman is staring at a wall of green. This is the bocage. It is a tactical nightmare born of ancient agriculture. For centuries, French farmers have piled dirt and stone into embankments 15 feet high to mark their land. Dense, tangled vegetation grows on top of these ridges. It turns every small field and cow pasture into a natural fortress. This is not the open desert of Tunisia. This is a claustrophobic maze where death waits behind every leaf. The sun is blocked by the canopy. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth and cordite. A single German machine gun team can hold a field for hours. They position their MG-42s in the corners of the hedges. They create interlocking fields of fire that shred anything moving in the open. When the American tanks try to support the infantry, they meet immediate disaster. To cross a hedge, a tank must climb the embankment. Its thin belly armor is exposed to the sky. A single German teenager with a Panzerfaust can end a 30-ton Sherman in seconds. The American offensive is grinding to a halt. The gains are measured in yards, not miles. The price of progress is paid in thousands of young lives. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt watches the daily progress from his headquarters. He sees the American struggle, and he feels a surge of hope. He believes the lesson of Kasserine is repeating itself. He thinks the Americans are technically superior, but tactically rigid and soft. He develops a strategy to exploit this. He will pin the British around the city of Caen. He knows General Montgomery is methodical. He can predict the British moves days in advance. He concentrates his elite panzer reserves against the Americans instead. He believes the Norman terrain will do the work of 100 division. The Germans feel they have a final chance. They are veterans of the Russian steppe. They know how to defend. They look at the Americans trapped in the hedges and see a paralyzed enemy. They wait for the inevitable collapse. They assume the Americans will keep trying the same failed frontal attacks. They assume the amateurs cannot solve a geometric problem of fire and movement. It is a reasonable assumption based on the early weeks of June. But it is a fatal error. It ignores the American capacity for rapid grassroots change. The stalemate is real. The frustration is deep. But the American soldier is not waiting for a miracle from Washington. He is looking at the hedge, and he is thinking about a way through it. The status quo, shattered. 14 hours. July 10, 1944. a repair depot near Isigny, France. Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 2nd Armored Division is not looking at a tactical map. He is looking at a massive pile of scrap steel. This steel was once part of Rommel's asparagus. These were the heavy obstacles the Germans placed on the beaches to stop the invasion. Now, they are the raw material for a revolution in armored warfare. The American military culture is different from the rigid German one. In the Wehrmacht, innovation flows from the top down. In the U.S. Army, it flows from the grease-stained hands of a sergeant. Cullen has an idea. He fashions 4 massive steel prongs from the beach scrap. He welds them onto the front of a Sherman tank. He calls it a rhino. A group of skeptical officers gathers in a nearby field to watch. A rhino tank approaches a 15-foot hedgerow. Normally, the tank would climb and expose its belly. Not this time. The steel teeth bite into the ancient earth. The tank pushes forward. The entire bank of dirt and roots explodes. The Sherman bursts through the other side like a battering ram. It is level. Its guns are ready to fire. The problem that paralyzed an entire army has been solved by a welder with a defiant attitude. General Omar Bradley sees the demonstration. He does not wait for a committee in Washington. He does not ask for a feasibility study. He orders every ordnance unit in 1st Army to stop what they are doing. They begin stripping the beaches of salvageable steel. Within 3 weeks, 60% of the tanks in the sector are modified. The secret is kept from German intelligence with absolute discipline. This is grassroots innovation. It is the ability to bypass hierarchy to solve a tactical crisis in real time. The Germans are waiting for the Americans to climb the hedges. They are waiting for the belly armor to show. Instead, they see a monster coming straight through the wall. The rhino tanks do not follow the roads. They move through the heart of the fortress. They appear where they are not supposed to be. They create paths for the infantry in seconds. The German defense, built on the predictability of the terrain, collapses. The fear is not just of the tank. It is of an enemy that refuses to stay stuck. The American system has bypassed the bottleneck of command to find a solution. The amateurs have out-engineered the professionals. They have turned a defensive barrier into an offensive gateway. The German army has no counter for this level of improvisation. It is the moment the war shifts for good. Total. Speed. 9:40 hours. July 25, 1944. A rectangular field near Saint-Lô, France. The sky is not blue. It is a vibrating ceiling of silver and gray. 1,500 heavy bombers are approaching from the north. This is the start of Operation Cobra. Below them, the Panzer Division is dug in. These are some of the finest soldiers in the German military. They are veterans of the Eastern Front. They are led by General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein. They believe they are safe in their deep bunkers. They are wrong. The first bombs fall. The earth begins to boil. This is not a tactical strike. It is a carpet of high explosives. For 3.5 miles, the ground disappears under a wall of smoke. The concussion is so powerful it ruptures the lungs of men inside their foxholes. It flips 40-ton tanks like they are toys. Bayerlein would later describe the scene as a landscape of the moon. He wrote that his elite division was erased in a matter of hours. The carnage is absolute. Over 1,000 German soldiers are killed instantly. Hundreds more are buried alive. The dust is so thick that men cannot see their own hands. Out of 45 operational panzers, only 7 remain. The communication lines are shredded. The command structure is gone. Bayerlein reports that no campaign in history could approach this battle of annihilation. He is witnessing the seamless collaboration of air, sea, and ground power. When the American infantry finally moves forward, they do not find a defense. They find a graveyard. The survivors are dazed and bleeding from their ears. They wander the craters with their hands up. The breakthrough has finally arrived. The bottleneck of the bocage is shattered. The American machine has used its wings to clear its path. This is not just a tactical victory. It is a psychological execution. The Germans realize they are no longer fighting a war of maneuvers. They are being ground into the dust by a technological monster. Operation Cobra opened a hole in the German line that could not be closed. Patton's Third Army is ready to pour through the gap. The war of movement has returned. The Germans had believed only they knew how to conduct a blitzkrieg. They were about to see the American version. It would be faster. It would be louder. It would be much more final. Bayerlein knew the war was lost in that single hour of fire. He knew his men could never survive this level of industrial mass violence again. It was the ultimate power of the integrated machine in full motion. This was the end for the German defense at Saint-Lô. Forever. It vanished. 10:00 hours. July 20th, 1944. A command bunker near Cannes, France. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stands before a map of the Western Front. He is a man of the old school. He respects the British. He views them as professionals who know their trade, but he does not fear them. To the German High Command, the British are a known quantity. They are methodical. They are disciplined. Above all, they are predictable. General Bernard Montgomery runs his operations like a ticking clock. Every offensive follows a recognizable pattern. First, there is a massive logistical buildup visible for days. Then, an overwhelming preliminary bombardment provides hours of advance warning. Finally, the infantry and armor advance according to a set-piece doctrine. It has not changed since the desert. This predictability is a luxury for the German defender. It allows them to identify objectives. It allows them to prepare countermeasures. It allows them to sleep. Von Rundstedt admits in his reports that his strategy in Normandy is built on this contrast. He screens off the British sector with minimum forces. He knows exactly where the line will be tomorrow. He concentrates his mobile reserves against the Americans. The reason is simple. The Americans attack with less warning. They exploit opportunities with a frightening, erratic speed. He knows what the British will do before they do it. He's never certain what the Americans would do until they were already doing it. There is a deeper reason for British caution that the Germans often overlook. Britain has been at war for 2 years longer than the United States. The trauma of the Somme and Passchendaele is still fresh in the national memory. They cannot sustain the same casualty rates as the massive American force. Conservative tactics are a matter of strategic survival. They are husbanding their remaining manpower. The British and Canadians take on the heaviest German armor around Cannes. They pin down 6 of the 7 panzer divisions in Normandy. This allows the Americans the room to break out. The Germans respect this professional skill. They appreciate the British grit, but they do not feel the same edge of anxiety. The Americans represent an unpredictable energy. They represent a system that learns and accelerates. The British are the hammer. The Americans are the lightning. One is a challenge. The other is a nightmare. The German soldier remains wary of sudden American thunder. 5:30 hours. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The winter air is a wall of ice. No blankets the pine trees. It muffles the sound of 2,000 German guns opening fire. This is Hitler's final gamble. He has gathered his last strategic reserves. He has rebuilt his elite SS Panzer divisions. His plan relies on a single, desperate assumption. He believes the American soldier will crumble under the shock of a surprise attack. He still thinks of Kasserine Pass. He still believes the Americans are fundamentally soft. He is wrong. The Ardennes offensive achieves complete tactical surprise. The fog grounds Allied aircraft. It removes the American advantage of air power. The initial assault shatters thinly held lines. Panic spreads through the command structures. But on the ground, the reality is different. The amateurs of 1943 have been replaced by the veterans of 1944. At Lanzareth Ridge, 18 men of an intelligence platoon and 4 artillery observers face an entire German paratroop regiment. 500 elite Fallschirmjäger against 22 Americans. Lieutenant Lyle Bach orders his men to hold. They are isolated. They are outgunned. They do not retreat. They stay in their foxholes and wait for the silhouettes to appear in the mist. For 18 hours, this tiny group holds the critical northern shoulder of the breakthrough. They disrupt the German timetable. They buy time for the reinforcements to arrive. When they finally run out of ammunition, the slope is covered in German dead. This pattern repeats across the entire forest. Small groups of Americans, cut off and surrounded, refuse to yield. They turn every crossroads into a fortress. The Germans expected a route. They found a wall. SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper is the spearhead. He is supposed to reach the Meuse River on day 1. It takes him 36 hours just to move a few miles. American engineers blow the bridges in his face. Infantry teams stalk his tanks in the dark with bazookas. The German shock fails because the American infantryman has learned to stay calm in the chaos. He has learned that a tank is just a target. He has learned that he is part of a system that will not abandon him. The Battle of the Bulge was intended to prove American weakness. Instead, it proved that the American military had achieved a level of resilience the Wehrmacht could no longer break. The transition was complete. The feared enemy was here to stay. Every single man fought like a professional soldier that day. 23:00 hours. December 21st, 1944, Tarstei, Bastogne, Belgium. The fog is a wet, freezing blanket that clings to the pine needles. Inside the perimeter, the 101st Airborne is completely surrounded. They are low on food. They are low on ammunition. They have no winter clothing. They are facing the concentrated weight of 4 German divisions. The German commander, certain of his victory, sends a formal demand for surrender. He cites the hopelessness of the American position. He offers an honorable exit to avoid unnecessary slaughter. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe looks at the paper. He offers a single, legendary response. Nuts. The German officers do not understand the word. They ask for a translation. The Americans tell them to go to hell. This refusal to accept the rational reality of defeat is what truly terrifies the German High Command. They are fighting an enemy that does not follow the European rules of warfare. To the German mind, a surrounded unit should recognize its tactical end. The Americans simply dig deeper into the frozen earth. While the 101st holds the line, George Patton is performing a logistical miracle. In just 3 days, he pivots an entire army of 100,000 men. He turns them 90 degrees northward. He advances over 100 miles through a blizzard to break the siege. This is the ultimate expression of the American system. It is the combination of individual stubbornness and massive mechanical speed. When Patton's tanks finally break through on December 26th, the German offensive is dead. The elite SS divisions that were supposed to reach Antwerp are now shattered remnants. They have been broken by a culture they once called soft. They have been defeated by the very mongrels they once despised. Winston Churchill would later call this the greatest American battle of the war. He was correct. Bastogne was the moment the German army realized there was no gap left to exploit. The American infantry had reached a level of professional maturity that could not be shaken. They were no longer the green troops of Tunisia. They were the immovable wall of the Ardennes. The fear in the German ranks was now permanent. They knew the end was coming. They knew the Americans would not stop until they reached Berlin. The industrial machine was moving. It was unstoppable. The wall held. The victory was total. 14:00 hours. May 23, 1945. A prisoner of war camp outside London. The war is over. The German generals sit across from their captors. They are no longer the masters of Europe. They are asked why they lost. Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, speaks of Patton. He calls him the most aggressive commander of the Allies. He admits that Patton acted exactly as a German master would have. General Günther Blumentritt is even more blunt. He tells his interrogators that the German soldier came to fear the American more than anyone else. It was not just the artillery. It was not just the air power. It was the lightning-like action. It was the way the Americans learned from every defeat. The journey from Kasserine to the Rhine was a transformation of the human spirit. The Americans began as amateurs and ended as the most formidable fighting force on earth. They built a system that multiplied courage with technology. They replaced individual skill with industrial certainty. The German commanders had been right about one thing at the start. The Americans were not traditional soldiers. They were something else entirely. They were a modern, integrated machine that treated the destruction of the Third Reich like a production problem. By the time the Germans realized their mistake, their army was gone. Their cities were ruins. Their ideology was dead. The Americans had won because they were willing to grow. They had won because they refused to stay defeated. The fear they inspired was the final verdict of history.